Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. It started with nothing more than a glance. A quiet, lingering look across the kitchen table while the coffee machine hummed in the background. I caught him watching me, not in a casual, passing way, but with an intensity that held just a little too long. His eyes didn't dart away. They stayed locked on mine, calm but curious, and I felt something shift. I told myself it was nothing. He was just being friendly, maybe a little awkward from living under the same roof for the first time in years. But something about the way he smiled, it wasn't the same smile he gave to others. It was softer, private, almost like a secret passed silently between us. The air in the house changed after that. It wasn't sudden, just warmer. The way he brushed past me in the hallway felt slower, closer. At dinner, I'd catch him looking at my lips instead of my eyes. When I laughed, his gaze would flick down, then back up. Like he was trying to read something in me. And the strange part? I didn't pull away. I didn't correct him. I didn't even pretend not to notice. One night, I stood at the sink rinsing a glass, the only light coming from the stove's digital clock. Behind me, I felt him enter the kitchen. I didn't turn around. I just stood there, listening to his footsteps grow slower as he got closer. Then silence. He didn't speak. Neither did I. But I could feel him, a few steps behind, just standing there, breathing. That night, I couldn't sleep. My room was warm, and my mind raced with thoughts I didn't want to admit out loud. I tried to quiet them, tried to let my body relax, but the sensation of that tension, that attention, stayed with me. I didn't know he was awake. I didn't know he'd walk down the hall. And I definitely didn't know he would open my door, quietly, step inside, and sit at the edge of my bed. He didn't say anything. And I couldn't move. I didn't stop. The next morning, everything felt different. Not louder, not awkward, just heavier. The kind of quiet that carries questions no one dares to ask. I made breakfast like usual, pretending nothing had happened. But every sound, the scrape of a chair, the soft clink of dishes, felt sharper, closer. He walked in, hair still damp from a shower, his t-shirt clinging slightly to his shoulders. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, too quickly. Our hands brushed when I passed him a cup of coffee. Just a second, barely a touch, but enough to make me pause. He noticed. His hand lingered for half a heartbeat before he pulled away. I turned toward the counter, trying to focus on anything else. He sat across from me, quiet, stirring his coffee even after the sugar had dissolved. "Did I wake you last night?" he asked suddenly. The question hung in the air. I hesitated, keeping my eyes on the table. "No," I lied softly. "I was already awake." He nodded slowly, studying me. There was no accusation in his tone, just something searching, like he wanted to understand what neither of us could say. After breakfast, I went to the living room, hoping distance would help. It didn't. I could still feel him nearby, could sense when he entered the room before I looked up. We moved around each other carefully, like magnets resisting and pulling at the same time. At one point, I reached for a book on the shelf just as he did. Our hands met again. He froze, eyes locked on mine. The space between us disappeared, but no one moved closer. "You should go rest," I whispered, though my heart was pounding too loudly to sound calm. "Yeah," he murmured. "You should too." But neither of us stepped away. When I finally did, it was slow, deliberate. I could feel his gaze follow, soft but heavy. There was nothing said, nothing done, yet everything about that moment felt like a line being drawn, and maybe almost crossed. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. Every word between them felt measured, as if the air itself was fragile enough to break. She told herself the moment in the kitchen meant nothing, that she'd imagined the warmth in his voice, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. But she knew better. Each morning, when he passed by her in the hallway, her pulse reacted before her mind did. A small nod, a faint smile, just enough to acknowledge the unspoken. One afternoon, they were both in the living room. He was fixing the TV's loose cable while she folded laundry. The sound of static filled the silence between them, thin, electric. When he turned, their eyes met across the room. Neither looked away. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, careful. "Yeah," she said, though her hands trembled slightly over the fabric. He stepped closer, meaning only to hand her the remote, but his fingers brushed against hers. A tiny spark, accidental but undeniable. They froze. Neither of them spoke. The quiet stretched on like a held breath. Inside, her thoughts warred with themselves. "This is wrong," she told herself. "You can't feel this." But her heart beat faster anyway, drowning out reason with every second. He finally broke the silence. "I don't want things to be weird," he said softly. "They aren't," she replied, but even she didn't believe it. He gave a small nod, stepped back, but not far enough. The space between them stayed alive with tension, the kind that makes even silence feel loud. She turned away, pretending to focus on folding another shirt, but when he moved behind her to reach for something on the shelf, his arm brushed hers again. They both stopped. This time, neither pulled away immediately. When she finally turned, their faces were inches apart. The air seemed to thicken. His eyes flicked down for the briefest second, then back up. Her breath caught. The moment balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then a sudden sound from outside. A car door slamming. Reality snapped back like cold water. They stepped apart. Night settled early, wrapping the house in a quiet that made every sound echo. Rain tapped against the windows, soft but constant, a rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. She was in the living room again, scrolling through channels just to fill the silence. Then she heard his footsteps. He appeared in the doorway, hair slightly damp, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Power's flickering," he said, nodding toward the dimming lights. "Yeah," she replied. "Storm's moving in." He crossed the room to check the window. For a moment, the lightning flashed, and in that second, their reflections appeared side by side in the glass. The sight startled her. How natural it looked, how close. When the thunder rolled, he laughed under his breath. "Guess we're stuck inside." "Could be worse," she said before she could stop herself. The air between them thickened again, not with words, but with the weight of everything unsaid. He sat down beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance, yet the warmth of his presence filled the space like gravity. They talked about nothing, old movies, weather, how quiet the house had become. But under every line was a pulse, a rhythm neither could ignore. When their hands brushed on the couch cushion, both went still. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice caught. A nervous laugh escaped her, small and breathy, breaking the moment before it could break them. "This is ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, it is." But neither moved away. The clock ticked. The storm outside grew louder, wind pressing against the windows. She could hear his breathing, slow, steady, almost in sync with hers. When she turned to speak, her words faded before they formed. He was watching her, not boldly, not carelessly, but with an honesty that made her chest tighten. The room shrank to the space between them. One more breath. One more heartbeat. Then, without a word, they both looked away at the same time, a silent, desperate surrender to reason. The storm raged on outside, but inside, they sat in stillness, caught between what they wanted and what they knew they couldn't allow. The storm passed, but the silence it left behind felt louder than thunder. They hadn't spoken much since that night on the couch. Every glance seemed to say we should forget, but neither managed to. One afternoon, she was in the kitchen sorting through old mail when she found an envelope addressed to him, but the handwriting wasn't familiar. Before she could stop herself, she read the sender's name. His mother. She hadn't realized they'd been writing. She hadn't realized how strained things were between them. Suddenly, all the quiet moments, all his long looks made sense. He wasn't drawn to her. He was looking for comfort. The guilt hit hard, burning through the warmth she'd tried to deny. When he came in, she held out the letter. "You should read this," she said softly. He frowned, took it, scanned the page. His jaw tightened. She's asking for money again. The weariness in his voice broke something open in her. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said. He looked at her then, not with longing this time, but with something rawer, sadder. "It's easier when you're here," he whispered. "You listen." Their eyes held. She wanted to speak, to pull away, but empathy froze her. His pain reached across the small space between them. That was when the door opened. Her husband, his father, stood there, briefcase in hand, eyes flicking from one to the other. Neither moved. The moment stretched. Then the husband smiled faintly, unaware of the storm that had just shifted inside the room. "Everything okay?" "Yes," she said quickly. "Just talking." When he left for his office upstairs, they both exhaled, shaky, guilty, alive. Later, she found him outside on the porch, the letter torn into small pieces beside him. The wind scattered them into the yard. "I shouldn't have stayed here," he said quietly. She shook her head. "It's not that simple." The porch light flickered. For a second, their faces were close, too close again. The air thickened with everything unsaid: guilt, comfort, need, the ache of two people trapped by circumstance. He reached out as if to steady himself, his fingers brushing her wrist. The touch was small, harmless, and yet her heartbeat thundered louder than the rain had the night before. "I can't do this," she breathed. "Then tell me to stop," he said. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Only silence and the sound of their hearts breaking the quiet between them. The house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that pressed in around the walls and echoed every breath. She stood in the hallway, hands lightly trembling. He was in the guest room packing, the sound of a zipper moving slowly, like even that was too final. He hadn't said goodbye yet, not really. He'd only said, "I think I need to go for a while." She knocked gently. "Can I come in?" He looked up from the suitcase. "Sure." The room looked bare already. A sweater folded neatly, a book half tucked in his backpack. He was avoiding her eyes, she could feel it. "I wasn't expecting you to leave," she said, voice quiet. "I don't know how to stay," he replied. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The space between them was small, but filled with every moment they'd left unspoken. The brushes of hands, the glances, the storms, the silence. "I was scared," she admitted. "Still am." His eyes finally met hers, and something cracked open between them. "Me too." It happened slowly. He reached up, touching her cheek, not to possess, but to remember. She leaned into his hand without meaning to. A tear slipped down her face. He caught it with his thumb. Their kiss wasn't wild. It wasn't hurried. It was full of everything they hadn't said, soft, unsure, but real. For 1 second, there was no weight. No rules. No fear. Just release. But then a knock at the front door. They froze. She stepped back. Reality rushed in again, fast and cold. "We can't," she whispered, eyes wide with panic. "I know," he said, breath shaking. "That's why I'm going." A long silence followed. And then he added, almost under his breath, "But if I stay gone too long, you'll forget." She shook her head, tears burning again. "That's the problem." "I won't." As he lifted his bag, the doorbell rang again, louder this time. They looked at each other, suspended in the moment. Whatever they'd become, it ended here. Or maybe it was just beginning somewhere else. Morning came quietly. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the yard glistening under a pale gold sky. She stood by the window with a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, watching the last of the puddles reflect the light. He was gone. The guest room door stood open, the bed neatly made. Only a folded note lay on the nightstand, brief, almost hesitant, as if every word had been rewritten a dozen times before it stayed. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. I needed you more than I understood. Don't worry, I'll be okay." She read it twice, tracing the faint smudge where rain had touched the ink. It wasn't a goodbye out of anger. It was a promise to grow, to change, to carry something good forward instead of something forbidden. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet settle around her. The house didn't feel empty, not really. It just felt different, lighter somehow. In that stillness, she realized what had truly tied them together wasn't desire, but the ache of two lonely hearts recognizing each other's silence. Later that evening, her husband came home early. He looked tired but kind, setting down his briefcase with a soft sigh. "You okay?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Yeah," she said. "Just thinking." They sat together on the couch while the sunset turned the room amber. For the first time in weeks, she leaned against his shoulder. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't simple. But it was real, and that mattered more than anything. She knew memories would linger. So would the tension, the almost moments, the unspoken words. But she also knew that letting go didn't mean erasing what happened. It meant learning from it. When the lights dimmed, she whispered softly to herself, maybe that's what love is, not what lasts forever, but what changes us. The story ended not with a kiss, not with a confession, but with understanding, something quieter, deeper, and, in its own way, far more intimate.